And we're live. Well, welcome everyone once again to We Are the Builders Australia. And tonight we actually also welcome Nate Pano, or Nate from Sydney's otherwise known. Welcome, comrade. How are you today?
Great. How are you guys?
Good.
Very good.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. No, you're still. I believe you're still locked down up there. I understand. So not moving too far, but.
Yeah, third day in, and it's supposed to be going for 2 weeks, but we'll wait and see if it goes any longer than that.
Fair enough. And welcome again, Helen. To that, how's life been down there in Melbourne?
Yeah, great.
Right.
Wonderful.
Good. Well, look, just for those, just before we kick off tonight as well, I'll just also acknowledge, we do some acknowledgement to country. We also welcome the traditional owners of this land. I'm actually on the land of the Jar Jar Wrong here in Bendigo, Central Victoria. We'd like to acknowledge the elders past, present, and future, and also acknowledge that the struggle of the first people here in this country was an anti-colonial one, and it was actually part of a broader form of class struggle, which is still to this day. They're still struggling against the effects of British colonialism in previous centuries, and also in the current institution that we got today. So their struggle is part of the broader class struggle, and we stand united with them. Well, tonight we're studying out of We Are City Builders from the Centre of Political Innovation Educational Manual on Caleb Maupin. And tonight we're on chapters 1.15, the Emergence of Scientific Socialism. And just discussing before, we were looking at reading the 3 chapters tonight: Emergence of Scientific Socialism, Imperialism, the Crisis of Marxism, and the Atlantis Pathology, a Mindset from Hell. What we do, we'll read right through the 3 chapters, take down any notes, and we'll go through the questions thereafter. If you wish to make a commentary too, Nate, feel free to do so. And look, for any live viewers out there, if you'd like to ask any questions, feel free to put it in the live stream as well. So for any questions, what I'll do is I'll kick it off, and then I'll hand it over to Helen. And I'll just put you on mute too, so we don't.
Oh, okay. So we talked about how things have changed over the course of human history, from the Roman Empire through to the French Revolution, and which was essentially around the period of the birth of capitalism. Tonight we're going to talk about more modern developments and how the struggle is a continual process of change. So it's it might feel like we're going backwards, but because we're always in a process of change, we are actually always going forward. And it really comes down to how much do the people want change? How united can we be to force change? And so. That kind of leads on to the whole question of the emergence of scientific socialism. So political and economic theorist Henry de Saint-Simon left hungry moralism and keep going. And built cooperatives while providing charity to the poor. Saint-Simon began to speak of socialism as an alternative to selfishness and individualism of the new society, where profits ruled and self-interest seemed far less restrained than ever before. The wealth industrialist and social reformer Robert Owen followed after Saint-Simon, becoming the first to speak of socialism in the English language. He constructed egalitarian model cities in New Lanark and New Harmony. The utopians followed a long tradition. The utopians followed a long tradition of seeking to construct an ideal world. But the first time science was applied to this project came amid the 1848 German Revolution. As a young man, the socialist revolutionary Karl Marx was a participant in a massive revolt that sought to create a German nation state. The uprising was part of the Spring of Nations, a series of rebellions that swept Europe. The rebellions demanded the creation of democratic republics, social equality, and better conditions for the people. Like most of the 1848 uprisings, the German Revolution failed. Marx's faction in the 1848 revolution, the Communist League, presented a document called the Communist Manifesto to express its beliefs. The text presented arguments for a new social order beyond capitalism. However, unlike Saint-Simon and Owen, Marx's arguments were not rooted in moral criticism and religious sentiments, but rather rooted in analysis of the history of human society and how it develops. Marx began his famous document with the words, "The history hitherto existing society has been the history of class struggle." He explained the constant drive of human beings towards a higher mode of production, fueled by the conflict between different social classes. Prior to this opening statement, Marx's preamble declares, "A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism," arguing that the ideas he presented were well alive all across Europe, and the 1848 manifesto was simply the first place to give concise, popular voice to them. Marx spoke of the working class, the proletariat, a class of laborers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only so long as their labor increases capital. These laborers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition, to all the fluctuations of the market. He called for the working class to rise up and take control of society, rescuing it from the irrational greed of factory owners. Quote, "The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degree all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, that is, of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total productive forces as rapidly as possible." Unquote. The Marxists argued that factory owners lived by extracting surplus value from those they hired and operated only according to what was profitable. As a result, the new society unfolding across Europe was plagued by economic crises, war, hunger, and poverty amidst plenty. While the bourgeoisie had done great things by breaking apart feudalism, Marx argued its new society presented fresh contradictions that could only be resolved by the working class rising up. Marxism argued that with the workers controlling the means of production, the economy could be rationally planned and human progress would no longer be restrained by the anarchy of production.
As Marx's close collaborator Friedrich Engels later explained, the purpose of the communist revolution was to establish a society where growth and human progress were unlimited. According to Marx's theory, with a state-run economy, humanity could be unleashed to gradually deconstruct all forms of social hierarchy and oppression. In a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving and subordination of the individual to the division of labour, and therewith also the antithesis between mental and physical labour has vanished, after labour has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want, after the productive forces have also increased with all-around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly. Only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society inscribed on its banners, from each according to his ability and each according to his needs. The ultimate vision was for human productivity and creativity, after perhaps thousands of years to establish so much material abundance that the need for any form of coercion or authority would fade away. In proportion anarchy and social production vanishes, the political authority of the state dies out. Man, at last the master of his own form of social organisation, becomes at the same time the lord over nature, his own master, free. According to Marx, the workers' revolution would lead to a centrally planned economy, and this would be the first step towards an ideal world in which people could simply take what they wanted to and do what they felt like doing, from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. Marx's economic work explained the natural instability of profit-centered economies. He described workers' competition with machines, the falling rate of profit, and the drive towards cyclical market crises due to advances in technology. Marx stated that the more effective a capitalist can carry out production, the fewer people he hires. In capitalism, human beings' ability to survive and prosper is tied to the inherent profitability to those who own the centres of economic power. Therefore, he argued that capitalism leads to a situation where abundance and efficiency creates unemployment and poverty persists amid plenty. Marx's political writings analysed in the 1851 coup d'etat in France, in which Louis Bonaparte marched into power seeking to restore order and liquidate a nationwide episode of unrest and instability. Marx described how in a time of crisis, factions among the ruling class begin to violently suppress each other in hopes of taking dramatic economic actions and stabilising a naturally unstable system. Marx helped form the International Working Men's Association, IWA. It was commonly called the First International in the hopes of spreading communist ideas across the world and uniting revolutionaries of different countries. Within the First International, Marx frequently polemicized with anarchists like Mikhail Bakunin and Ferdinand Lassalle. He advocated left adventurist who advocated left adventurous violence and did not see revolution in a scientific way. Marx analysed the Paris Commune of 1871, where French workers saw the capitalist government surrender to the invading Prussian armies. The workers established a short-lived working-class regime to defend their city. Marx had originally opposed the Communards' uprising. However, after it was underway, he praised it as an example of workers storming heaven and taking great risks to advancing history and defend their communities. Marx said that the Paris Commune of 1871 was the first dictatorship of the proletariat, and that similar uprisings would soon sweep the world. Eventually, the First International broke apart due to factional disagreements between Marx's allies and anarchists. However, Marx observed the formation of the German Social Democratic Party, the SPD, in 1875. He composed a pamphlet called The Critique of the Gotha Program, pointing out non-scientific aspects of its founding document. Eventually, the German SPD adopted Marx's ideas as its official ideology.
I think you guys are muted there.
Sorry. Though Marx never visited the United States, he was employed by the New York Tribune, an American newspaper owned by the abolitionist Horace Greeley. From London, Marx composed columns praising Lincoln and called the US Civil War the Second American Revolution. Describing why working class people across the ocean felt enthusiastic about supporting the anti-slavery war, Marx wrote, "The working man of Europe feels sure that as the American War of Independence initiated a new era of ascendancy for the middle class, so the American anti-slavery war will do for the working class. They considered an earnest of the epoch to come, that it fell to the lot of Abraham Lincoln, the single-minded son of the working class, to lead his country through the matchless struggle for the rescue of the enchained race and the reconstruction of a social world." Marx's followers played a key role in this war, with the German communists who fled to the United States, forming the Ohio 9th Infantry Regiment and fighting against slavery on the battlefield. Textile workers in Britain, organized into Marx's IWA, refused to work with the cotton picked by slaves and held demonstrations supporting Lincoln and his Second American Revolution. While the British textile factory owners saw the US South as a cheap source of cotton, and London and Wall Street insurance cartels saw slave exports as an opportunity to make profits, Marx argued that the interests of the working class people were on the other side. Marx wrote, "Labor in white skin cannot emancipate itself where the black skin is branded." Dave, can I just make a suggestion that maybe because we have Nate on with us tonight, maybe we should ask the questions in between each chapter? because otherwise it goes for too long, and Nate might, we have the books in front of us, but might not remember the kind of details of the chapter. So, so one of the questions that arose out of that chapter is, are there any utopian socialists today? And if so, what distinguishes us from them?
I don't know if there's any utopian socialists today. I mean, unless you can probably attribute that to various anarchists out there today, because, I mean, in a way they are kind of utopian because they just want to skip the whole socialism stage and go straight to the magical communism switch. So, I mean, if that qualifies as the context of utopianism that we're talking about today, that certainly, I think, puts them in that category fair and square. I think you could say that what separates us from them is that we have a methodology of getting to that. We don't think we can just abolish things and destroy things. We think we can actually create things that will lead to that as stepping stones to increase the forces of production and create those foundations of abundance to create the foundations of communism eventually.
Yeah. I was just interested on that question because there is a history here in Australia as some form of utopian socialism of the late 1800s, and there was a whole group of those early socialists, more along the social democratic line later on, but they left on a ship called the Royal Tar from Sydney Harbour, and they actually went to Paraguay in South America there and formed the New Australia, which was a utopian socialist society. Eventually actually developed problems within itself and then split and formed Cosme as well. A lot of the descendants are still living there today of those people. But the thing is, what it was, they just didn't grapple the scientific understanding of socialism and how to establish an economy. They just basically, well, we're going to start a new world. Off we go, and they did not take into account the current material conditions of that particular country at the time. Obviously, I think I was the president of Paraguay, I forget his name now, long from my memory, did open them up. Look, they wanted to develop agriculture and all that, so it was like a very form of agrarian type utopia, but it actually fell apart because they could not perceive the actual had a clear understanding of scientific understanding of the social system they're under and what they were trying to establish in the first place. That came down to the gist of it. So it sort of fell apart very quickly. I also look at some of the type of hippie communes today, somewhere on the far north coast and that. But generally, to me, they're trying to form some sort of utopia. But the reality is, they do tend to fall up in the drift on. It's just the realities of everyday life that wouldn't exist.
Yeah. I was gonna mention the cult movements and the hippie movements as being our utopian type people. But look outside of society, look outside of the working class. Want change, but want to essentially, if we followed that path, if everybody followed that path, it would lead us into an unproductive, backward state, really. So it comes down again to, okay, some individuals can do that. Some individuals can, give up living in the city and go out and, plant whatever they want and form communities out there. But the majority of people can't do that. So it's still a really individual process, not a changing society process.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think by extension, I think we could call all communes really idealist utopian sort of arrangements, because it's they're trying to be some sort of like insular community that is disconnected from the material conditions as they are. It's kind of like trying to make an ice cube in a fire. It's just never going to work. I just think, and so that's a really interesting tidbit that you raised before, David. I'd never actually heard of that, and that blows my mind. I'm going to have to do some more reading after this, but that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think actually, for those who watch, I may watch this later on for reference, there's a book that came out. It's no longer in print. If you can find it, I think it was called Dawn to Dusk. And it was all about the early foundation of the Labor Party. But E.H. Lane, he was one of the early founders of it in Queensland. But his brother William Lane was one of the leaders of that utopian social movement where I think it was about 1899 or 1900 left there. They left on the Royal Tart of Paraguay to form it. But if you want to Google it, William Lane might be. Try to look at that, or even just New Australia or Cosmic, COSME, I think it's pronounced that spelt. The other thing was interesting. William Lane later on left Paraguay. He actually went to New Zealand and worked and became quite conservative. Worked for a newspaper in Auckland, so he became a conservative commentator and reporter for New Zealand, for major New Zealand, for an Auckland newspaper at the time. So there you go.
Yeah. And of course, that's quite likely to happen. You know, people when they think they're making these radical changes in their life and doing all of these great things, but then it doesn't work out, and they don't have anywhere to go. So they end up being hostile to the people that they tried to do this thing with, create this utopian with. They become hostile to that situation, and then the only path for them is conservatism. It's not very often that you get them coming over to Marxism and saying, okay, we need to change the whole of society, not just our individual position in it, but the whole of society. They don't do that. They just go, oh no, we'll go and do something else, and it'll be better for me. It'll be better for me.
Yeah.
So the second question for this chapter is, following in the footsteps of Marx, how do we analyze movements, uprisings, and revolutions today?
Ooh, that's an interesting question now. I was actually looking at it before. I think we've actually need to stand from a class point. It was the class forces behind these revolutions. And I think that's something that we'll look at, because I've just, in the last 20 years, we've seen a lot of these so-called, or these coloured revolutions in Eastern Europe and other places around. And even some of those in the Middle East, when they talk about the Arab Spring or Arab Uprising, I think it was, and they're talking about these are revolutions. They weren't at all. In fact, you had to look at the forces behind them and find out there was nothing revolutionary about them at all. They were actually counter-revolutionary. They were there to install a US-imposed puppet regime and install US economic interests. And basically, that's what we saw from the 1990s or late 1980s onwards. Through it, and even right up to modern day in the Middle East, like for example Syria, the attempt to topple Assad, and ISIS and the FSA, the whole lot. That was all US sponsored, CIA organised and Israeli backed, the whole lot, to obviously expand US interest in that region and destabilise the region to such a degree that China itself can't expand further, and so is Russia. So that. Well, not to expand further, I'll retract that, but actually to try and cause that much disruption in that region, basically to try and cause a lot of heartache and grief for China, Russia, and Iran as well. So that's we tend to look at. Well, I look at it now. Let's look at what are the class forces behind it, and the good question. It's a really good point, because just because it might be a protest or it might be someone with a big rally, we should go out and support it. Wrong. I think we're just going to take a step back, because sometimes then if we just go out and automatically support it, we wind up being on the wrong side of history in a spectacular fashion. And I won't name names and name groups, but there are a lot of groups in this country that would do just that without actually taking a thorough critical look at what's going on here and what class forces and behind it.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I think it's mostly the owning class appropriating the aesthetics of radicalism in order to cultivate this fake left following to impose some kind of movement in order to destabilize governments. And we've been seeing it more and more recently. It's only going to get more and more intense as they get more and more desperate.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
For China and all that kind of stuff. Sorry, Helen, go on.
Well, no, I was just going to say, and they, the interesting thing is that they use, in order to cloud the issue, they use the same language as the revolutionaries. So they talk about revolution, and they talk about democracy and all of these kind of ideas that are essentially communist ideas. because we know that democracy doesn't exist under capitalism. It cannot exist under capitalism. We get to go to the polls every 4 years. That's not democracy. So all of these ideas and these concepts that they start using to cloud the issues of what's behind these movements in these countries. And I think you're absolutely correct, Dave. From a class analysis is the position that we have to look at what's going on around the world and see what the forces are behind those movements. One of the easiest ways is to read the media. And if the US is loving what's happening, then you know that you might as well be saying, oh, well, I'm opposed to that, because the simple fact is that if the US likes some movement or is behind some movement or is giving it good coverage in its newspapers, then it's a pretty bad sign for the people on the opposite side of that movement, because that movement will ultimately be opposing the working class. That's the ones that the US is promoting. All right, so the third question and the last one in this chapter is, how does the anarchy of production cause problems for us in modern day? Could this be fixed by having a planned economy?
Well, actually, the capitalist production is actually designed for one thing and one thing only, is to create profit. And that's what it's there. It's not, for example, food production. It's not there to actually benefit us to satisfy our hunger and then satisfy our needs, which obviously we need food for survival. It's there to make profit. So obviously they're going to make a whole lot of abundance of food and obviously overproduce a lot of food. And what's actually part of the anarchy production, there's no planning around it. Well, if we've got excess food, why can't we export it to people in need, and and you move it to some others that might be, or even to communities that might require it immediately, etc. There's none of that at all. It's there for design one thing, and that's what the underpinning thing about this anarchy of production. It's all designed for one thing, is to make profit. And I was interesting just recently. I think there was I was just listening to this report on podcast, and they were talking about how a lot of supermarkets and that now, and even some restaurants are either throwing out their food, they've got like excess food they've cooked and used, and they're trying to put chains on it. And actually, for those who are homeless and they're trying to break into feed themselves, and obviously they're homeless and they have no money and they need to eat, and that way to stop homeless people from accessing that food. And I'm just thinking, this is crazy. You've got all this food, it's perfectly okay, but instead you want to throw it out. Because why? Because they can't make profit from it. And that's as simple as that. They can easily give it to them, but this is crazy. No, you can't do that. We can't make profit. And this is what happens. And when it flows onto this next question about could this be fixed by having a planned economy? I think one thing, yes, to a certain degree will, because then production would have to force, no, you're going to be producing this so we can feed these people. We need X amount of this food so we can actually immediately address certain people's malnourishment, need to do this, need to do that. No, you're not just there to go off and make something so you can make profit from. This is what it's going to be designed to do. I can get that as well, and I'm just using that one example. I'm not just. There's plenty of many other examples through that, but I believe anarchy of production does cause problems for us in the modern day. We seem to overproduce stuff, and we're not satisfying a need. In fact, more people are in more desperate situations. People go hungry because there's too much food. People go homeless because there's too many homes. They can't able to afford to buy a home anymore. There's many more examples we can demonstrate today for us here in Australia.
Yeah, I might throw in another example actually. If you have a look at even the last 1.5 years during this pandemic, we've seen a lot of situations that could have been completely averted or made a lot safer if we had a central plan to try and manufacture enough PPE for everybody to wear. Safety equipment is extremely scarce, or at least was extremely scarce in the worst of the pandemic last year. I personally know a lot of health workers who hadn't had access to proper PPE, and these were actually hospital workers. So if even they couldn't get PPE, that's extremely dire circumstances. You need a centralised government, a central plan to mobilise your manufacturing forces in order to respond as quickly as you need to in a serious situation like a pandemic.
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point, because I've just been listening on the radio, about the chaos of trying to distribute these vaccines, and just totally, who was Malcolm Turnbull was on, and just ridiculing the government for its absolute archaic vaccination distribution, and that's part of, we might think of that as being accidental or just something that couldn't be controlled, but the fact is that type of chaos and that is the same as the economy under capitalism. It's economic chaos under the system of capitalism. But I think what Marx, one part that it was really interesting to me in this chapter, he talked about a class of labourers who live only so long as they find work, and who find work only as long as their labour increases capital. These labourers, who must sell themselves piecemeal, are a commodity like every other article of commerce, and are consequently exposed to all the vicissitudes of competition and to all the fluctuations in the market. And that's also, that to me kind of sums up the anarchy of production under capitalism as well, where human labour is considered a commodity and is at the mercy of the market as well. So when things are good and the economy's booming, there's lots of employment, people are working, the wages seem really good, people want to go out buying and so on and so on. But as soon as there's a bust period, then human labour is also thrown on the scrap heap along with all other forms of production, because we've got too much of things that we need. People can't buy them, and so therefore, we become unemployed, and therefore we can't buy more, and the crisis just gets deeper and deeper. So I think that's and it's the fact that human labour becomes a commodity under capitalism is, to me, the very nature and the very core of this society. So we don't work to benefit society. We don't work because we're contributing to society. We're just working because we're at the mercy of capital. We're increasing capital for another class of people.
Can I just add this? Luke actually is offshoring our own ability to produce things. Well, just a couple of things on that. I mean, some of it will answer, because we're not this offshoring. I believe you might be referring to free trade agreements, and I think the next section will cover some of that as well, for some of that question. But this is all part of the anarchy of production. They obviously why they do this offshore is to look further and further elsewhere as well. That's what they do. But it's the same thing if they offshore stuff. They're still producing all these goods and all this commodities, but for what? They're just for one thing, is to profit as well. What Luke just said, offshoring our own ability to produce things. I think one thing the next chapter is going to cover a lot more of that. I was just looking through some of the questions, but it's still the same thing, regardless if you offshore it or not. It's still there's no proper planning behind it, and we just wind up having chaos in the market. See, some sort of background noise there. Is that me?
Yeah. Might be you, Dave. Shall I continue with the next chapter?
Yes, all right, I'll put myself on mute.
All right, I'll continue with the next chapter. All right, so this chapter is called Imperialism and the Crisis of Marxism. And I introduced this this section tonight, saying that that living in our societies are always under a constant process of change, and new ideas come along, and that's part of the process of change as well. So the Marxist movement proliferated across Europe, most especially after the death of its founding prophet in 1883, and that was Marx. The Socialist International, the Second International, as it became known, emerged as a continent-wide mass movement, with the German Social SPD, which was a social democratic organization, as its flagship organization. Millions of working class people joined Marxist, Labour, and social democratic parties. Unions fought for the rights of factory workers. Universal male suffrage, restriction on the length of the workday, and union representation on the job was established in many parts of Europe. Socialist deputies were elected to many parliaments, and Marxist writings were broadly distributed, and institutes of Marxist studies were established. The United States was not left out of the rise in socialist consciousness. Activist Edward Bellamy's science fiction novel, Looking Backward, was published in 1888. The text told of a beautiful futuristic USA in which the rule of profits had been eliminated and human beings lived in comfort and cooperation. The book created a sensation across the USA as a bestseller. People inspired by the novel formed nationalist clubs to promote his socialist vision. To promote the vision Bellamy's narrative presented. Among those who promoted his socialist vision was Edward Bellamy's cousin, Francis Bellamy. Francis Bellamy was a Baptist minister who later composed the Pledge of Allegiance. Daniel De Leon's Socialist Labour Party of America, and eventually the much larger Socialist Party of America, led by Eugene Debs, began to spread the Marxist gospel of social revolution and rational economics across the American heartland. Debs travelled in a red train from city to city, calling for the working class to take its place as the masters of US society. Upton Sinclair, Ida Tarbell, John Reed, Lincoln Stevens, and other socialist journalists exposed the crimes of the rich and powerful. The industrial workers of the world organized the desperately low-income and immigrant trade and industrial workers who were rejected by the American Federation of Labor for being unskilled. In the first decade of the 20th century, Marxism was everywhere in the Western world, and the working class was more organized than ever before. Yet socialist revolutions did not occur. Scholars began to write about the crisis of Marxism because it seemed that while Marx's ideas had widely proliferated, they did not manifest themselves in predicted proletarian revolutions they were intended to create.
The crisis of Marxism and the lack of revolutions and uprising occurred because the global economy was changing. I'm just going to read that. I think it's a very important point to keep in the back of everyone's mind. The crisis of Marxism and the lack of revolutions and uprising occurred because the global economy was changing. Factory owners were being upset by bankers. As international corporations based in Western capital spread themselves across the world, living standards from some strata of the homelands were rising. Writing from Russia, Lenin described this new global order as imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Lenin wrote, "Imperialism is a specific historical stage of capitalism. Its specific character is threefold. Imperialism is monopoly capitalism, parasitic or decaying capitalism, moribund capitalism. The supplanting of free competition by monopoly is the fundamental economic feature, the quintessence of imperialism. Monopoly manifests itself in five principal forms. 1. Cartels, syndicates, and trusts. The concentration of production has reached a degree which gives rise to these monopolistic associations of capitalists. 2. The monopolistic position of the big banks. 3, 4, or 5 giant banks manipulate the world economic life of America, France, and Germany. 3. Seizure of the sources of raw material by the trusts and the financial oligarchy. Finance capital is monopoly industrial capital merged with bank capital. 4. The economic partition of the world by international cartels has begun. There are already over 100 such international cartels, which command the entire world market and divide it amicably among themselves until war redivides it. The export of capital, as distinct from the export of commodities under non-monopoly capitalism, is a highly characteristic phenomenon and is closely linked with the economic and territorial political partition of the world. 5. The territorial partition of the world colonies is completed. The rise of the international market led to bankers, supplanting factory owners with industry depending on credit and lending in order to function. Unlike industrialists, bankers have a fundamentally anti-progressive historical position in relation to the world. For example, figures like Henry Morgan, Andrew Carnegie, and Henry Ford ultimately sought to see living standards in the United States increase. They viewed their own profits as rising alongside advances in technology and scientific progress. The various captains of industry could be ruthless in breaking strikes and crushing those who challenged their power and profits. But they still built libraries, financed public works, and on some level believed that their own advancement, accompanied by advancement of the country and human civilization.
The financial elite of creditors that usurped the factory owners and came to rule the world in the monopolistic associations, which Lenin described, had a completely different relationship with the world and with human history itself. This current represents nothing more than a financial middleman, accumulating its position and making profits through the lending of money, not production. In his time, Marx described the rise of what he called fictitious capital, writing, quote, to the extent that the depreciation or increase in value of this paper is independent of the movement of value of the actual capital that it represents, the wealth of the nation is just as great before as after its depreciation or increase in value, unquote. The imperialists maintain their super profits by super exploiting countries across the developing world. In order for Wall Street and London to maintain their position as monopolistic rulers of the global market, it was necessary to tear down any level of development that was taking place across the developing world. Great nations had to be reduced to the level of captive client states. The world had to be made poor and kept poor, so that Wall Street and London could be made rich. The financialization of capital led to a new level of stability and also resulted in stratifying the working class of Western countries. As the skilled workers and craftsmen saw their wages increase, they became far less interested in solidarity with industrial workers deemed to be unskilled. English-speaking, US-born and white workers in the United States banned foreign-born, non-English-speaking and non-white workers from their labor unions. Most of the labor unions in the American Federation of Labor were openly racist, allowing only white workers to join. Lenin labeled this layer that emerged among the working class as the aristocracy of labor. It was made up of workers with higher pay who sympathized with the Western capitalists against lower paid workers and people in the colonized world. As the labor federations and Marxist parties became dominated by the labor aristocrats, they became far less interested in revolution. They also became far more sympathetic to militarism and hostile to foreign nations. Essentially, a section of the working class was being unconsciously bought off and becoming loyal to the bankers and their governments.
Okay, well, for the questions on that of that particular chapter, that was really actually quite well read and condensed there as well. The first question is, what American socialist influences the most? Well, just to answer that for myself, I love William Z. Foster, especially his book, The History of the Three Internationals, which actually myself and Dust James did last year. We did a series on that on his channel as well. But I'll open it up for the others.
I quite like Eugene Debs. Yeah, it's I like, in particular, I enjoy his writing style. Back in, when I was first learning about it, he was instrumental in my understanding of overproduction and anarchy of the market. And the way he explained it in his contemporary terms, I kind of found a more clarified understanding of it than even I did through Marx or Lenin that I read previous to him.
For myself personally, I don't think I've been particularly, well, no, I haven't been particularly influenced by American socialists as such. I came from a communist background and at a reasonably early age was introduced to the classics, Marx and Lenin and Engels, and so I didn't really get much of an influence from other sources. But now, of course, the world has so many examples of fine socialists that we know of: Castro, Che Guevara, Chavez, Assad. You know, the list just goes. Stalin. The list goes on and on and on and on. And so there's so many rich examples now of truly revolutionary communists that we can use as examples.
And actually, just on that too, and I mean, sorry, jump in there. It was, I think, actually, two Australians, various Australian socialists and early communists. And actually, I enjoyed Catherine Susanna Pritchard's reading "Why Am I a Communist?" That was really interesting, and also Joan Williams, sorry, I've heard novels. I think they're hard to get now because not in print anymore. There was, and obviously too, I enjoyed some of the early communists there, such as Lance Sharkey, Ernie Thornton, Stan Moran, all them. They really were just made of sound stuff and really easily read. You'd be actually able to find some of this material, some of their material on the Marxist Internet Archive, or Marxist.org, I think it's called. That's probably the best source finding through. I think otherwise, a lot of the old material is not there, but some of it is on the internet. Led to believe, but some of that stuff is really good as well. And I think having a look at some of the reading, but even too now today, I think some of the new people coming through, I think eventually they'll start developing and developing some good reading as well.
Yeah. So the next question that I think is a good one. It's asking the question: is it a good tactic to follow in Eugene Debs' footsteps and tour the country preaching socialism? Should we all be driving around in a little red in a train with a little red car and be preaching socialism?
Well, the dog in the background tends to agree.
I'll just put myself on mute.
Well, I mean, look, we can learn from a lot of the tactics. Obviously, look, there's other forms of transport too, but we've got other ways to communicate as well, because back then that's probably the best way they could get around at that time. Obviously, communication was limited, but obviously, especially in America, the railways or railroads, and they were quite dominant forms of transport at the time. So they were able to actually be quite mobile in that sense. But I think that, yes, we can learn a lot from tactics about speaking tours. Obviously, at the moment, with all restrictions and lockdowns, it makes it a lot harder, but it doesn't stop us from doing something like this, even on an electronic form, like via, organising a Zoom conference to all sorts of live conferences as well. So we've got a lot more technology now compared to what they had then. We can communicate our voice. But I think actually it's importance that we do reach out to the ordinary masses.
Yeah, out of the movement into the masses. Yeah.
That's it.
It's an interesting question, because traditionally that's what socialists and communists have always done, is gone around preaching about socialism. And I think that's really what the question is driving at. And I don't think it's done us necessarily any great favors, because we tend to, and this is what you were saying about getting out of the masses into the movement to the masses. the preaching style that we used in the past was probably a little bit alienating. I don't think there was anything wrong with it at that time, but I think it would be hard for us to go back to it now. I look at things like the election in Peru and the documents that have come out from the party called Peru Libre, Free Peru, and they've done this constitution, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing, and it's the kind of material that we should be producing that can get us out of the movement and into the working class and into the masses. It's easy to read. It's comfortable to read. It's inspiring. It says the right things. And I know that the communist movement has always had something similar to that. That we'll have 10-point plans of what we demand and so on. But we're just preaching. We're not actually we're not talking to the workers in their language. We're not saying what they need to hear. We're not inspiring them to want to join us. And I think that's always been a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I think actually what's the important thing is where it's not about just trying to kind of preaching socialism. I think it's got to be related to their ordinary everyday struggles and ordinary needs. I think that's what people need to do, is connect to ordinary workers and find out what their needs are. It's basically from the masses to the masses, like in Chairman Mail there. And that's important. We have to listen for starters and find out what the concerns are to break it down and then condense it and put it back to the masses. And then basically this is where council not just come out of nowhere and saying, this is all big as a knight in shining armor, and this is the way to go. I think the most important thing is that back then in Eugene Debs' day, they actually related it back to ordinary workers as well, to their struggles and why they're struggling, why they're doing this, why they have to do that, why they actually have to go to work, but why they're struggling to make ends meet, and then related it back to the struggling for socialism. Well, there is a way forward, and this is why we can and actually throw some practical steps what people can do as well. And I think that's why they link the theory and practice together. If we split the theory and practice, the theory just, as all is, just stays theory. It just becomes sterile, and the practice becomes just futile. It's just there. So that's the key to it. The theory and the practice need to be linked together. Just to one before we go, there was a question: is De Leon worth reading? Well, yes. I wouldn't object you to saying no, don't read Daniel De Leon. I think you should to understand what was happening at the time. Keep it in the historical context, what he wrote at the time. There might be some brilliant stuff in there as well. I actually personally haven't read any of his stuff. I have heard a lot about him, but I would say I would say read it. Find it yourself. Make your own mind up. I'm not going to tell you what you should be reading or what you shouldn't be reading. I think it's something you need to actually discover yourself and find out. But there might be some useful information there. But certainly, go for it.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say. I think when it comes to what to read and who to read and everything like that, I was actually having a conversation with somebody today about socialist and communist literature, and a lot of the books that this person had read were sort of from a hodgepodge mixture of like semi-reactionary kind of like, not really getting into Marxism but almost Marxist. And I raised the question, well, hang on, if you're reading about these popular socialist figures throughout the ages, why aren't you actually reading from these popular socialist figures directly? You can read all you want about what people think about Stalin or people think about Marx or people think about Lenin, but if you haven't read anything from Marx, Lenin, or Stalin, or any of the above, how are you ever supposed to come to any kind of balanced, reasonable knowledge about these people and these movements?
Yeah.
Well, that's actually a good point. Well, I do know we need to go to the next question, but that's a very good point. I think for anyone that watches this, it's a good recommendation. Go to the source. Don't just think of someone's opinion of what they personally think about a particular person. I mean, no one's perfect, but what I means, but go to the source itself, and you'll find out where you make up your own mind from there on. That's why when I got asked about Daniel De Lyon, go to the source, read about his stuff. It's worth reading.
Yeah. So the next question is, and this is crucially important as well, is how does imperialism keep the developing world poor?
I would say through finance capital mostly. We have the institutions of finance that go out into the world in poor and developing countries and commit economic subterfuge and blackmail and all kinds of things in order to get the wealth out of the country and to keep the people poor in pursuit of their own profit. So it's like Caleb says, it's a system. It's not a verb or something that you do. It's something that is an extension or even the highest stage of capitalism, and so therefore it can't be divorced from capitalism. It's just capitalism exported to other countries, and the effects of that are that you're going to have this massive movement of capital from lesser developed countries or underdeveloped, overexploited countries, as Michael Parenti puts it, into the first world imperialist countries.
There's two tactics how they go about it as well. It's not about just throwing some money at a particular country. What I think some people get this confused. There's two ways to do it. There's a soft version of it where they actually prefer to have a government that's quite suitable to them, have a vassal state, if you want to put it this way, or they do it by direct force, like flogging the hell out of it, economic sanction, the whole lot. Imperialism, no, it's not a policy. It's a system we live under, and Australia has been part of that system as well. We're pretty much a vassal state of the American foreign policy and economy as well. It was quite interesting. I shared something up yesterday about that, and what I'm having a look at and how does it keep the developing world poor? Well, it would be either through crippling sanctions, through brute military force. It'll go either through other destabilising projects such as coups, etc., brutal military dictatorships, completely financed and funded, and that way allows it to happen. And what from there on, they're able then to extract all the wealth from there into the coffers of London, Wall Street, Tokyo, well, to a certain degree, but mainly London and Wall Street and other European financial institutions. And that's one way they kept that going. And I'll give you a classic example. We were just talking about COVID before and how instructed and actually threatening developing countries. We'll give you all these vaccines if you do that. So there's another way they do it. It's called ransom. Well, if you need this, we'll give it to you if you put this policy and do this. If not, you're not getting one thing. We're going to put a shipping blockade on you if you don't. So, and that's what they tend to do. So, yeah, how does imperial keep the developing world poor? That's a classic example. Look what they're trying to do with Venezuela. Look what they're trying to do with Cuba. Everyone else that's trying to develop their own independent course, develop their own country. Oh, we'll put blockades and sanctions on them. Classic example. Peru, I believe, will be the next target as well.
And of course, for capitalism, there, like any society, there's opposites, and the imbalance in development and growth means that some countries will be poor and some countries will be wealthy. And under capitalism, it has to be that there is wealthy and there is poor. There has to be unemployed. There has to be employed. It cannot be an egalitarian society because that wouldn't be capitalism. The whole premise of neoliberalism is based on essentially starving the developing world. The IMF, and started in the 70s, but obviously the World Bank had its own structures as well. But the IMF is particularly cruel in that it lends countries money and then stipulates to them how they spend that money, and primarily they're not allowed to spend money on social welfare or social programs. So the IMF says, yes, you can borrow this money, but you cannot use it to improve the country. You cannot use it to improve the condition of the people. You can only use it for structural purposes, and generally that of course means that you're giving it to multinational corporations anyway to build those infrastructure and those structural buildings or infrastructure or whatever. So again, it's starving the people and it's keeping the countries poor. We'll lend you money, but you'll do as we tell you what to do with that money. So and of course it creates just like being unemployed or having a population of unemployed people creates a reserve army of laborers, which means that you can drive down wages when things are bad in your economy. You can drive down wages and workers will have to work for less. The same in the developing world. You can drive down conditions in those countries and impoverish them even further to extract their natural wealth and their minerals and their to pay back their debts that have been borrowed on. So it's a cruel system, and it's a degrading system that we live under. All right, so I think that's all of the questions.
Well, just for the last question here, because Luke asked a question we did make us offshoring our own ability to produce things. Liz, how has the process of stratifying the working class continued? What is the current situation facing the aristocracy of labour in the USA and other Western countries? Well, to explain what's going on here, Luke, what you're seeing here in Australia is the destruction of the labour aristocracy, decline in unions, decline of good-paying union jobs, industries. You've probably heard the term free trade agreements, for example. Well, actually, let's call free trade agreements what they really are: low-wage police state agreements. Because what's happening, Wall Street, those who are back on the soft touch approach, be it the big banking corporation, the oil bankers, the Rockefellers and all them, etc., want to have one total global dominant system of their capital. And basically that requires that everyone, the majority of the world, is poor. And that's why, and not good high paying union jobs as like we once enjoyed many years ago, for example, in the 70s and that. This is what we're seeing here. When you mentioned about offshoring of work and that was all part of it, and that's designed to also lower our standard as well. It's a continual destruction, and that's why you're seeing this backlash. You're seeing and obviously you're seeing a lot of those people that enjoyed those high-paying jobs many years ago now supporting people like Trump just recently is a classic case in point, because what's happened, they've fulfilled the vacuum where really for many years ago we would have filled that vacuum of turning into good pop. We had left-wing type populism. We talked about housing for all, pre-education, a good secure job, and etc., where now it's all been turned around, and it's been done deliberately in such a degree. What we've seen here, and this has been the process that's been done here for some time now, where basically, I saw the comment about not being a leftist, and I don't know you're saying why with the right. Well, the fact is, I don't see you like that at all. I just see you someone who's been disillusioned with the system, bombarded with neoliberal policies for the last 40 years. You've lost a lot. We've seen it. We've seen the factories close down. We've seen what imperialism's done to us, and the offshoring of jobs and the complete destruction of everything that we hold dear. And instead, we've been attacked. Oh no, we're all wrong. You should be tightening your belt even further. If it's cold, put a sweater on, put a jumper on instead of turn the heater on, and making ends meet. So this is what we're saying is and what's facing the current aristocracy. This has been a systematic thing over the last 40 years, probably 30 years for us especially, but they're completely dismantling of all that. So we've become a low-wage police state, and that's what we're seeing here. So hopefully, I try to sort of make that comment when you mentioned about offshoring our own ability to produce things. That's where it flowed on there as well, and it did too. Where COVID-19 really exposed Australia just how import dependent we are for an island continental nation. That just basically it's put Australia into a very dangerous ground now. Sorry, comrades. I didn't mean to take up that.
Yeah, I think that's probably great grounds to approach the masses to float the idea of renationalisation of certain industries. You know, we have huge amounts of billions of dollars that are going to foreign corporations in terms of tax cuts, in terms of subsidies, you know, that kind of thing, and none of that ever stays in the country, ever contributes to anyone's, you know, well-being at all. That could easily be redirected into brand new manufacturing industries to you know, give us the high wages that we've been led to accept here in this country. It can also make us competitive at the same time internationally with our products. It could kill two birds with one stone. It could also unite the so-called right and left of the working class. So that's a viable, I think, campaign to go up on.
Very good point. Okay.
Excellent. Okay. Yep. So moving on to the next chapter, the last one for the evening.
Yeah. Let's support the Atlantis. Yeah. Do you want to start that?
All right. Yep. So this is the Atlanticist pathology, a mindset from hell. The dawn of imperialism, a new stage of the capitalist economy, greatly changed social relations. It resulted in a state of mind unfolding in the Western world that can accurately be described as an Atlanticist pathology. The ruling class of Britain, led by its royal family, boasts about being descended from the Normans. The Normans, a Germanic tribe of Vandals and Odinists, seized England at the famous Battle of Hastings in the year 1066. The Viking raiders of the sea and Vandal tribes of the forest did not build cities, they raided them. They stole from those who had constructed. They went to see what had already been created and looted it, and in some cases destroyed it. As the British industrialists subordinated themselves to entities like the East India Company and the various finance houses of the London Stock Exchange, the same predatory and destructive means of existence came to dominate the international markets. Various geopolitical analysts have referred to Atlanticism as a trend amongst Western nations. They have prioritized control over the trade routes and maritime dominance over economic development of the mainland. The Queen's Empire infamously burnt down the various looms of India and Bangladesh. As the colonizers, they forced a civilization that had been weaving for thousands of years to import its cloth from Britain. China faced 2 opium wars in response to the emperor's efforts to raise living standards and stop the inflow of destruction and plunder. British bankers established the Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, HSBC Bank, for the purpose of controlling China's economy and keeping a great civilization poor. Opium became a central aspect of British imperialism. With the force of the British military, various parts of the world were seized, economically looted, and reduced to a mere captive markets for British products. Britain was simply the first in line when it came to imperialism. Germany, France, Belgium, and eventually the United States soon moved into the globalist model of international capitalism. The Western powers began seizing parts of the developing world, and with economies centralized around banking institutions and monopolies protected by the state, they extracted immense profits by crippling the developing world. From 1885 to 1908, Belgium oversaw a genocide of roughly 15 million people in the Congo Free State, an African colony under the personal direction of the king. Most of those who perished were worked to death in the process of extracting natural rubber. The United States seized the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, and then from 1899 to 1913 fought against Filipino resistance. Between 250,000 and 1 million Filipino civilians were killed over the course of this fighting.
As Britain rose to be the top superpower of capitalism in its imperialist monopoly stage, the writings of Adam Smith came to be the celebrated view on economics. Free trade and free competition in one big global market was to tear down international borders and allow the superior ones to rise to the top. Language lifted from Charles Darwin's biological texts were used to justify the horrendous atrocities carried out to secure London's position as imperialist top dog. The notion of survival of the fittest was nothing new among thieves and criminals, but Darwin's work allowed the British to proclaim their destruction and impoverishment of people across the world as simply the natural order of things. The British settlers gunned down entire African villages with primitive machine guns, justifying their crimes with social Darwinist rhetoric about inferior races. Rhodesia emerged as an apartheid plantation state named after the great imperialist Cecil Rhodes in the territory that is now Zimbabwe. Rhodes described the colonisation of the world and the enlistment of British workers to be settlers and overseers across the planet as a matter of ensuring social peace and preventing class struggle and revolution. In 1895, Rhodes wrote, "I was in the East End of London, a working class quarter, yesterday and attended a meeting of the unemployed. I listened to the wild speeches, which were just a cry for bread, bread, and on my way home, I pondered over the scene and I became more than ever convinced of the importance of imperialism. My cherished idea is a solution for the social problem. That is, in order to save 40 million inhabitants of the United Kingdom from a bloody civil war, we colonial statesmen must acquire new lands to settle the surplus population, to provide new markets for the goods produced in the factories and mines. The empire, as I have always said, is a bread and butter question. If you want to avoid civil war, you must become imperialists." The rise of the Atlantis pathology involved promoting a generalised Vandal mindset among the population. The British homeland, much like Rome, developed a domestic culture designed to breed sadistic raiders and vandals. In Victorian Britain, parents were taught never to hug their children and to greatly restrict their affection. Sadistic corporal punishment became standard for school children, with rattan canes imported from Asia as treasured implements for inflicting pain. A puritanical and shame-based attitude towards matters of sexuality became widespread. War was glorified in every aspect of life. As British imperialism rode high across the planet, plundering and destroying what is now labelled the global south, at home, Britain was cultivating a culture of insanity. It was the British Empire that introduced humanity to what is now described as the serial killer, a pattern of criminal behaviour in which a man murders women in a sexualised manner. London's infamous Jack the Ripper grabbed headlines in 1888 with his killing and mutilation of prostitutes in London's Whitechapel, the very working class quarter where Cecil Rhodes had his revelation about the importance of imperialism less than a decade later. As the gruesome details of the murders were reported in the press, the London Times received thousands of letters from individuals hoping to take credit for the unsolved crimes. Most of the letters were anonymous. However, they revealed that beneath the surface, many British people, raised in the atmosphere of glorifying war, plunder and punishment amid sexual oppression, just secretly cherished fantasies about engaging in similar behaviour. Finish.
With so many imposters stealing the spotlight, the actual Whitechapel murderer sent a body part from a victim in a package to prove that he was the real Jack the Ripper. The letter containing half of a human kidney was signed "From Hell." Soon this pattern of serial killers who sexualized their murders became a widespread phenomenon across the Western world, declining only in the past few decades. An article from the Guardian newspaper published in 2018 quotes criminologists noticing this pattern of homicidal behavior has seen a clear downward trend from the 1989 peak. Whatever progressivism has been at the foundation of the revolutions to topple feudalism seemed to be pushed into the background with the rise of imperialism, capitalism in its monopoly stage. The new global economic order became an expression of the Atlanticist pathology. The Vandals had seized control of the high seas, and as pirates, they proceeded to raid and plunder the entire world. The city builders were in retreat. All right. So the city builders are the workers, and the Vandals are the imperialist ruling class.
Okay, well, that concludes that. So the next round of questions we had to hear from this. particular section. And just before we move on, big shout out to Dust James. I actually went together. We host Working Class Revolt. That's on our Sundays here at 10 o'clock. It's on. Just go to Dust's channel and Anti-Imperialist America. Also, a big shout out to Comrade Freak as well. He conducts his own YouTube channels. He's First Nation or First People. He lives, I believe, he lives in Darwin. And he has these some little YouTube clips as well, and warrants. And I believe we should be able to give him a lot of support for what he does. So welcome aboard, comrades. Welcome on board. Well, the first question we have there from the Atlantis Pathology, a mindset from hell. What are some of the Atlantis pathology mindsets in the world today?
I suppose a lot of that could be attributed to a lot of the Democrats' policies that they've got going on at the moment. A lot of finance capital is, I would categorise as Atlantis' pathology. You've got that sort of American Euro sort of, liberal sort of order that's perpetuating itself in the form of imperialism today. I can't think of anything else that I could put it down to, although I'm sure there's more.
We'd have to consider that the wars that are being conducted around the world to undermine freely democratically elected governments would have to be considered part of the Atlantis pathology, where they want to tear down things. Anything progressive that's being done around the world is torn down. We even see it on a micro level, and even in our own countries. When we think about real estate and the fact that old buildings get torn down to be replaced by new buildings, old buildings that could be renovated and done up and preserved for their historical importance, are just simply pulled down because developers want to get in there and build new buildings and make money out of them. So that's kind of part of that whole process of destruction, and out of destructions there's wealth. So they don't see anything, no longer as progressive things seen as being able to create wealth, but rather we'll destroy the old and create wealth out of the old. So that's part of that Atlantis pathology for sure.
And I think actually too, I mean, yeah, it's besides building our built heritage as well, and also a big shout out to the CFMU Construction Division, New South Wales, their green ban on Willow Grove. For those of you from overseas or elsewhere around Australia, there is a green ban on a beautiful old 1800s mansion, I'm led to believe, near Parramatta, and the Gladys Berejiklian government, or otherwise known as Bin Chicken, corrupt government is wanted to actually sell that land off for developers and take that beautiful mansion and surrounding gardens down brick by brick to put it somewhere else. Don't know where. I was explaining that, and the beautiful little, it's an historical part, but also too our natural heritage as well. We've got some prime bushland, but still at the end of the day, still under threat from anything, from mining, the whole lot, and that's a typical Vandal or Atlantis pathology mindset as well. But also you mentioned about wars. Actually, I think proxy wars should be actually part of that thing. I mean, believing it's not just Syria. We're looking at what's happening in Yemen as well, where the people are struggling for their own liberty and pardon me, mindset and for their own liberty as well and liberation, but obviously US-backed Saudi Arabia, then they're trying to do their damage as well. And we're seeing that for African countries like Nigeria, which is currently in a civil war of their own. They've got these so-called rebels, which they're not. They're actually religious fanatics, and being funded by CIA processes. So that's another form of Atlantis. Pardon me, I didn't mean to cough. The form of Atlantis mindset as well. I like the next question here. What role does Britain play in contemporary geopolitics?
We tend to see Britain as being the old empire, and that it's on its last legs kind of thing. But I'm not sure that that's correct. I think it's very powerful in the financial world. and very much disguised. You know, the US seems to dominate the world economic situation and so on, but behind that scene, I'm convinced that Britain is playing, and the royal family in particular, is playing a huge role behind the scenes in the high finance or monopoly finance around the world. So I think it's as powerful as it was. Perhaps doesn't have as much influence in terms of at a governmental level, but from a financial level, I think it has enormous power.
Certainly in its former colonies in Polynesia and other colonies, it is quite influential still. In terms of maintaining imperialism in those countries. So yeah, it's definitely not irrelevant by a long shot.
That's right. I mean, Britain did play right up to, well, especially for here in Australia, right up to World War II, played a huge part influence in our politics here in Australia. I mean, we still had, till this day, we have the, Queen of Great Britain as our head of state. And actually, I've just in our contemporary politics, well, they played a role in the sacking of, say, the Whitlam government, and it was, Whitlam wanted to steer. The Whitlam government wanted to steer Australia on its own course, and that was both the CIA was involved in that, and others as well. Like a big no-no. But the royal family was involved in that as well by the Governor General at the time, John Kerr. So it comes to say they still, to a certain degree, play a role. And what's interesting, every time you put the news on in the evening, regardless of what you say, the ABC, there's always something about the President of the United States, the American government. There's also something about Boris Johnson, or the latest British Prime Minister as well. Notice we still, and maybe someone about the royal family even. So it just comes to say that they in some aspect they haven't completely vanished from the scene altogether. Mm-hmm.
So the next question, which is very interesting, is how can we combat manifestations of the Atlanticist pathology within ourselves?
I guess the first thing about that would be not to criticize actually existing socialist countries and to not be taken in by attempts at color revolution. And to more critically examine what the conditions are and what the class distinctions are within countries that are at war, whether it be civil war, whether it be proxy war. Examine who the various agents are in that war and why they're fighting and who they're fighting on behalf of. Yeah, it's got to do with, I think, countering that propaganda that's been instilled with us, I think.
And that's flowing on. I think, our mainstream media is a classic example, even including the ABC and SBS. China is a classic example. People's views on that has been manipulated in such a way. If they actually, what I would be recommending for everyone, if you want to combat your manifestations or your views about China, is to actually go to the sources yourself, find out the sources yourself, and actually go to the Chinese media sources, look at other people that are operating and get both sides of the arguments, even, make it their own. But obviously, this is where we sort of develop if it was in the newspaper, it must be true. So it was in the Daily Telegraph, Herald, Scum, it must be true. No, it's not. Basically, understand what media is. Media is just a mouthpiece for big business, and that's what, and big business interests. It's nothing that's what it is. It's basically propaganda of the day. So that's something we always have to, well, for me anyway, I mean, obviously is look to the source and what we study it. Maybe we've sort of answered it right at the first piece. Look at the class forces behind it, everything as well.
Well, and I think there's one other aspect as well, and that's ensuring that we don't, and this is what you guys have said also. It's to make sure that we don't align ourselves with the wrong side. So in a union struggle, not to align ourselves with the anti-union position. which we probably wouldn't. But by the same token, it's easy to fall into the trap of seeing the bosses as our friends and aligning ourselves with their kind of ideology and that's in all walks of all different aspects of our lives. It's really difficult to combat all of those forces that are coming at us day and night to persuade us that capitalism's fine, that the system is fine. It's a great system. It's the best one we've got. It's never going to be any different. Why do you want to change it? Okay, we're all in this together. It's a bad time right now, but it's okay. We'll come out of it, and so, that kind of tendency that we have to not want to have to rebel against everything is, we've got to stay strong and stay positive and stay really focused on who the enemy really is in all walks of life and all areas of our life.
Yeah, just to add to that, Helen, it's probably going to get a lot harder in the future to look at alternative sources, especially with media. I'm sure you guys have been aware of the recent seizure of Press TV and a couple of other Iranian-based websites. If this tendency continues, what's stopping them from doing it to various, say, Chinese websites or South American websites? Telesur is on the chopping block, I assume, next. So it's going to get harder and harder, I think. So more and more, we just have to keep a critical head and just try to figure out why are they trying to convince us of these particular things and what the class forces are behind it.
Absolutely. And there was one section in here talking about the media, and I thought at the time that it's WikiLeaks is the modern day version of that, and I'm not sure what it was referring to, but you're right. The seizure of the press, independent free press, it seems to be occurring all of the time now, and it started with the kind of WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden and all of these people that were exposing what's going on in our society, and I think you're quite right, Nate. It's just going to increase over the coming years, for sure. And a big shout out to Julian Assange. He is 50 this weekend. His 50th birthday will be held on the 3rd of July, and all around the world there's going to be protests and celebrations of his 50th birthday. So shout out to Julian Assange, and let's hope he comes home free.
Also, too, an important announcement for everybody: Donald Rumsfeld is dead. That fucking war goon, that international criminal, is dead. His soul has plummeted to hell, where it's been consistently ripped apart for the rest of eternity. We're overseeing it right. Because I tell you what, that's how I feel about it. I know I'm just going a bit off a tangent there, but I know we shouldn't go promoting about this, and I'm trying not to be I suppose the Atlantis pathologically, but I was just like, without trying to have to celebrate, but he's dead, but the only thing is saying, I wish he was actually, before he died, he was brought and changed in front of the International Court of Law and tried for war crimes against humanity and lying to everyone about Iraq and weapons of mass production, which were never there in the first place.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, he escaped justice. Let's just hope he's keeping a seat warm for Kissinger. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's 8:30, so that might be a good positive note to end the evening on. And okay. Dave, will we be doing this again in 2 weeks' time? And Nate, you are more than welcome to join us again.
I'll see if I can join. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, the next two parts for the viewers, we're looking at, the next three parts, we're then looking at the party of a new type, then socialist construction, the rise of Eurasia, and victories for all humanity. So please come again. It's every fortnight. don't know the name of the date. I'll find that
That'll
out
be
later.
the 14th.
Thursday the 14th at 7 p.m. Look, send me a message if anyone that watches these. Send me a message if you'd like to be involved. I highly recommend ordering this book. You can order it online. You can either email Caleb Maupin on calebmaupin@gmail.com, or I'll just Google it, and that'll obviously order it online as well. Look, once again, thank you for everyone participating tonight. Thank you for those viewers. Please hit the subscribe button. Please share this far and wide. But feel free to make any further contributions. So, we'll end it off tonight. I know we usually go. We want to end this off tonight as Dare to Struggle, Dare to Win, Workers of all countries unite. I think we'll end it off at that. Go, Dare to Struggle,
Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to Win,
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
Workers of all countries unite.
Workers of all countries
Workers
unite.
of all countries unite.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Great show.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.